So hi everyone, my name is Geoff Harder. I'm the Associate University Librarian at the University of Alberta here. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to spend the next 30 minutes talking to Roger Macdonald from the Internet Archive for the session, How Machine Learning Could Open Media for Contextualization with Reliable Fact-Checking and Related Data. Just to introduce Roger to everyone, Roger joined the Internet Archive in 2011 to help create an open digital public library of TV news. It provides a means to thoughtfully reflect upon the most pervasive and persuasive medium of our time. Certainly no coincidence that Roger spent the previous 11 years helping to manage the nation's largest independent non-commercial TV network, Link TV. And prior to co-founding the network devoted to global news and culture in 1999, Roger helped create and manage several other organizations engaged in addressing international challenges, often through media, including the Gorbachev Foundation. So welcome, Roger, and it's great to chat with you today.
Hey, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you all. Well, I direct the television archive here at the Internet Archive, and I'm in our headquarters in San Francisco. We are a digital library whose mission, ambitious as our mission statement should be, is universal access to all knowledge. And thrilled to join you and the members of this conference, and we are closely allied with the University of Alberta and the library there.
And we've been very happy to have you as a partner. So it's great to chat with you, Roger. Maybe you could just give us a quick elevator pitch about some of the activities that the Internet Archive is involved in, and then spend a little bit of time talking about the work specifically that you've done with the television news archives.
Certainly. As many of you know, we started some 20 years ago archiving the web because it was an effervescent temporary thing. And we have some 380 billion web pages. We're continuing to crawl a billion or so every day. We've been, in the last 20 years, we've been really good at holding on and grabbing stuff, but we've not been so good at helping people find stuff. And so we are attempting to expand our collections, which include digital books, software, television, and other media sets, while right now trying to help facilitate people and machines to dive deeper so that they might both discover things that they're interested in, as well as explore larger meta-analysis.
Yeah, and you've done a tremendous amount of work in that area. Can you talk a little bit about the television news archive itself and sort of what led you to begin to develop that collection?
We started collecting TV in the year 2000. And recently opened up an archive of all national U.S. news and news from select U.S. local stations, as well as a little bit of international news. We repurposed the closed captioning as a search index. Part of our mission is to evangelize a perspective that all media are data and that metadata are profoundly important. And this closed captioning is extraordinarily valuable, granular metadata that we employ to assist people in search. We launched that within the context of the U.S. elections in 2012 publicly, so we've been around, and it's a service to particularly journalists and scholars so that they might explore political messaging and political persuasion in the context of elections, because to help give citizens a better ability to discern the basis on which to make important decisions. So we started off with building on these metadata of captioning. We've elaborated that a bit with audio fingerprinting, where we started audio fingerprinting political ads last year, and spread our collection points out into 23 markets in key U.S. battleground states, and sucked down all the TV and identified political ads and joined them with fact-checking by our fact-checking partners, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and the Washington Post Fact Checker. They've found it really useful in order to kind of contextualize these political ads with information about assessments of their veracity, as well as information on the background of who is behind the political ads. And in the case of political action committees and some flavors of political action committees, That's not so obvious. There are opportunities to wrap who's behind the money, and a considerable amount of obfuscation. And as a library, we're really vitally interested in how we might contextualize the media we have to understand not only the provenance of its collection, but pointers to its source. So we've extended that as well. We had a number of journalists utilize our audio fingerprinting to audio fingerprint the political debates and look for the presence of sound bites in subsequent TV news to answer the question, if you didn't watch the debates live on television, what parts of the debates would you have seen on which channels, and what did those editorial choices reflect? So that proved to be really interesting. Subsequent to the elections here, we had a great deal of interest in people coming to us and saying, well, we'd like to see everything that you have on TV of now President Trump speaking. And we'd love to be able to search that by topic. We'd love to see everything that Trump said on topics of immigration. And our reply was, yeah, we'd love to see that too, but the code of TV has not really been cracked. And we think there's an opportunity that we're exploring, opening up to a multi-stakeholder collaboration to employ machine learning to essentially crack the code of video on two key attributes. Let's have exquisitely fine-grained speaker recognition, who is talking, exactly when, and topic clustering, who's talking, exactly when, about what. And there's a variety of near-term purposes to which a number of researchers and scholars and journalists would like to do with this, and that is to be able to look at the propagation of talking points, to feed the workflow of fact-checking journalists, so that machine intelligence might understand that, this is an apparent assertion of fact that relates to these data sets that have been identified as reliable, and that might bear relationship to a data set of previous fact checks, so that pointing towards a future where there may well be increasingly close to near real-time contextualization of lots of media with context of reality, context of assessment, and frankly, just opportunities for people to dive deeper and treat TV as a knowledge base.
That sounds amazing to be able to arrive at that place where we can actually do real-time, live fact-checking. I'm really curious, you just unpack a few of the things that you were talking about there, and there was a lot that we could talk about, but can you talk a little bit more about some of the partners you're working with to try to apply some of these new technologies around using machine learning or other techniques? I think there was a blog post not too long ago that was talking about you were working with a group called Hyper Audio to do the fingerprinting.
Yes, there's a wonderful group led by a guy named Mark Boas, based in Italy, and he was a night news fellow embedded in Al Jazeera some years ago, and he's part of a coterie of coders, investigators, and journalists who understand that TV does not have to be the cognitive model for TV. Doesn't have to be treated like an Egyptian scroll that you have to unfurl it to get anywhere, but rather that there can be an index, a granular index to TV, so that people and machines can get right to the point. So we have renewed we've always been close to their work and are now looking for opportunities of how we might take some of their expertise and collaborate in this larger venture. And this larger venture, what we're really envisioning is the Internet Archive has a considerable amount of other people's content in various domains. And we take considerable care with them so as to not inadvertently trouble both business models or psychological comfort of content creators or distribution platforms, yet while always offering opportunities for public interest results to come from public library access to knowledge. And in the case of TV, we don't facilitate wholesale downloading or the like, but we do facilitate, it's a research tool. It's not a lean-back DVR in the clouds. So to that extent, what we're envisioning with this larger scale machine learning collaboration is working with both some of the big commercial institutions as well as academic research groups, and some new exciting startups that are hacking at that these opportunities afford, that the machine learning opportunities afford for finally being able to interpret some details, machine readable details of the complex signals within TV. So we're looking to set up a kind of a branch library, a digital branch library of the Internet Archive with 1 million hours of U.S. television news, with captioning, with all kinds of other metadata, in an environment that is accessible only for research, so that it can be used as the basis of machine learning to, as I said before, to kind of crack the code of video so that all kinds of questions should be asked. And like in every other domain of the applications of AI, we are highly aware, cognizant, and sensitive to the ethical implications therein. We already have some examples where some social networks have let loose AI and they have done a magnificent job creating Truman Show-like environments for keeping people emotionally connected and managing the ebb and flow of that without understanding the larger consequences of, so what did that mean for the world at large? So throughout this entire 2-year project that we are just in the early stages of, we'll be continually paying attention, as will a number of our partners, to ethical considerations. Just one small one is the matter of privacy. When you apply facial recognition to video, it's clearly just fine to do that for public figures, for news commentators and announcers and anchors, but it's not so clearly fine to do it for those people in the background of those videos. So we'll be looking to apply some rigorous standards and kind of continually reassessing what potential unintended consequences could happen. And really, once again, be a model for how media sets might be creatively investigated, employing AI while not being a disturbance in the force.
I wanted to ask you, I just want to probe a little bit about the machine learning does lean a lot on the data that's fed into it. So can you talk a little bit more about the sources of content that you do have, what you have been archiving? And I guess, a follow-up question I would have is, do you feel like it represents enough voices to sort of paint that full picture?
It doesn't represent enough voices nor a full picture. And most of those voices are in English language. Right. So that's, of course, ridiculously narrow. And this is large-scale conventional broadcast television news, also ridiculously conventional and narrow. What we're doing is we have a great deal of this content. Love to model how this could be set up in an environment where all stakeholders are really comfortable and benefit from it, and public benefit is clearly in mind. And let this be a model for expanding out to larger and more diverse media sets. And in the domain of TV, we collect some foreign language television from around the world, and we have been hacking it some ways to do automatic speech recognition against non-English languages, and developing some primitive search indices based on that. But we'd love to include some of those media sets And that's just with TV. We see this because there's these, particularly in this domain of sort of fake news and alternative facts, there's this understanding that, boy, we really ought to get a grip on our understanding of media and how it influences people and what is the propagation of reality and alternative facts. But that said, we'd love to see these kinds of approaches applied to text-based communications, to a variety of different sort of communications. This notional, still, large-scale collaboration is really just a model for where we can go and how we can proceed thoughtfully and responsibly.
Really interesting idea, I think, to try to get the, we want to make sure that we don't end up with TV news as one siloed source of information, but to try to triangulate that with other information that Internet Archive has, but also feeding that in from other sources and collections that might exist elsewhere. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the thematic collections, special collections as you call them, on the Internet Archive site that you've developed. So one of those is the Trump Archive, the other one is Fact Checked, which I think you had referenced earlier on. Can you talk a little bit about those collections? I guess what was Internet Archive's motivation for setting them up? Who are you partnered with? And, again, sort of what kind of usage are you seeing from them? Is there a lot of journalists leaning on those collections right now? Are you seeing the average person accessing those collections? What kind of patterns are you observing there?
So I mentioned that post-election we had a great deal of journalists and scholars coming to us saying, my goodness, what do you have on Trump? I'd like to see everything he's ever said on TV. And as I mentioned, I said, we replied, yeah, we'd love to do that too. Mm-hmm. So as we started envisioning how we could approach this, and we've been attracted to the opportunities of machine learning in the last couple of years with the remarkable breakthroughs that it's made in certain domains when enough data, media are fed into it, that we decided to prototype what some of the results of that might look like. So we spent a good deal of human curation time with a little bit of machine assistance in curating a collection of Donald Trump speaking in speeches, being interviewed within our television news corpus. Once again, that which we've surfaced just goes back to the mid-2009 to present. We found that those who were asking us for assistance in doing that search were relieved to be able to dive into still as yet very primitive, but a fairly significant collection around the now President Donald Trump. We're also are in the midst of curating a similar kind of collection for the leadership of the United States Congress, both the Senate majority and minority leaders and the current majority and minority leaders of the House of Representatives, and all of that which they have said on TV. And then, because we've been working so closely with the fact-checking community and are really interested in doing more to help serve that community, and because we're also really interested in what the opportunities are for the contextualization of media, we've taken fact checks of statements by now President Donald Trump, by our partners PolitiFact, Washington Post, and factcheck.org, and joined them with those assertions when they were made on TV. And we have I guess it's nearly 1,000 fact checks of Trump that you can go to you can find in a couple different fashions. One, we can go to a table where you can sort by topic and date and the like, and then dive in to see the actual quoted segment. And you can also view it in our television interface, so that while you're watching TV and seeing the duration of a program, you'll see notations that a statement has been fact-checked. And when clicking upon that, you can see and hear that statement and then see outbound links to the relevant fact checks. Oh, and I think you asked, so what are people doing with it, and what kind of traffic are we seeing, and who's using it? Well, we know who's using it among our partners, but we don't know who else is using it. That's a key thing for the Internet Archive, because as a library, we are not collecting information about library users, and we hold library users' privacy paramount and have a well-deserved and storied reputation for resisting attempts to break that bond of privacy.
I very much appreciate your response, Roger. That's great to hear. This is obviously it's going to be your opinion, but can you talk a bit about how influential do you feel that TV is these days? How much of an impact does it have on people's sense of what is true and what is not?
Oh, it's an interesting question. There's been renewed research in this kind of domain, and in the U.S., TV is still overall the dominant form of news, in part because of the demographics where older people in the United States get the majority of their information from television news. Television news is also a source material for content that is excerpted, either literally with clips or in other kind of references, and shared in a variety of social media. So it's often the TV is the source that gets perfused among all kinds of other non-television, other means of communication. One of the challenges of that, and YouTube is used a great deal for that, one of the challenges with using YouTube is that it's not a library. People can upload that and cut it and take things out of context and put mistaken metadata associated with this. This may not be a contiguous quote from a politician that may or may not have appeared on CBS News on January 27th. Whereas at the Internet Archive, our metadata are reliable, and that when people quote it, you can link back to not only the quote, but see and hear it in context. TV remains an important media set, but one of the great drawbacks of TV is that it hasn't been searchable, it hasn't been adequately quotable, and it hasn't been adequately analyzable at machine scale. As a knowledge resource, we think it's relatively untapped, and we'd like to model about how all kinds of content creators can open up their archives of TV in general, of TV news in particular, and allow people to treat them as a knowledge base.
Just on that front, are you actively working with any content producers right now to try to strike more formal agreements to archive their materials and have them incorporated into things like the television news archive?
Oh, we're open to everybody to archive their material and do so in a manner that's respectful of their interests and concerns. Before we launched the television archive, we spent considerable effort in reaching out to the networks and other content contributors and distribution platforms to let them know what we were doing, to kind of evangelize this perspective and model how what we could do, how we would be happy to help them go down this path. And there's a number of them who've taken us up on that, and so a number of them have evolved how they're treating their media. And occasionally we'll get inquiries from specific networks asking, we lost all our metadata about this. We never carried through the captioning to our archives. Can we get it back from you? And absolutely. We'll give chunks of metadata back to those who create it. We don't give that out to others, though.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I think there's all sorts of opportunity there to try to, as you spoke to, there's a lot of English language content there right now, but really to try to sort of extend the reach, so to speak, to attract content from a global audience. That I think is hugely important. So it's great to see, I think, some of the content producers stepping up, like you've indicated.
Yes, we too agree. We think it's vital.
So just to shift topics a little bit again, you obviously touched on some of the ethical issues that can come up with applying machine learning to things like these television news archives. Based on your experience to date, what have been what are the biggest cautions that you might want to point out to people in terms of what Internet Archive has learned from their experience?
Well, there's cautions associated with machine learning that are mostly that are not terribly clear to us, other than hubris is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. That unintended consequences can have profound impacts, and we take that quite seriously. We have some notions of things to watch out for about the invasion of privacy, of which the Internet Archive is vitally interested in. But the larger part of the institution of a library is to be careful stewards, to make sure that we can hold on to and preserve so that these knowledge bases, whether they're text, web, TV, are preserved for future generations, and do so in a manner that is thoughtful and human and respectful of those content creators. There's been other ventures that have sought to grab a bunch of other people's content and have done so a little thoughtlessly, that haven't done so in conversations with those who are concerned about it. And we take those concerns to heart. That sort of domain of caution about opening up, of being champions of open while being respectful of closed.
I'm really happy to hear you talk about stewardship and preservation over collections such as the one that you've helped to develop. I think it really does represent quite a resource and treasure for all of us, and so it's important, I think, to make sure that we don't lose those access to those collections as we go along. And certainly, the more open they are, the easier it is for all of us to ensure that those collections do persist. I think we're running almost to the end of the session now. I'm just wondering, Roger, what from the Internet Archive's point of view, from your point of view, can people do to help with this effort if they're interested? Are there ways that research institutions or others can get involved? Are there specific, you've talked about a lot of the video AV related nuts that you'd like to crack, I think was the terminology that you used. Mm-hmm. Are there ways that we can help?
Absolutely. First, to keep in mind, though we have these grand ideas and think that there could be some wonderful social insights gleaned from them, at our hearts, we're librarians. We're just here to help make other people's jobs easier to learn. So adding to our collections, conversing with us, telling us what you want, how you'd like to explore it, these are vital for us because we're not product developers, we're librarians. To the extent we develop product is how we try to enhance access for scholars and journalists and people at large. So it's all part of a conversation, and we'd absolutely love to talk to y'all.
Well, that's great, and a perfect note to end on, Roger. So I want to thank you very much for your time. That was a really fascinating discussion, I think, and you're doing some great work there. So on I think, behalf of all of us here at the Around the World event and beyond, I think thank you to Internet Archive for making things like the Television News Archive available. And thank you again for your time. And everyone who's been listening in on this session as well.